Hello and welcome back to a new episode of SGTV. I'm Marcus Barrett and I'm part of the technical engagement team here at the Scolmore Group. I'm joined by my colleague Tim Benstead. And today we're going to be looking at a new set of regulations. Well, I say new, Tim, but actually it's BS 5839 Part 1, isn't it?
It is. It's not new, but it is new in the sense that it's been updated and it's now published for 2025.
Oh, lovely. So when we think about an update then, does it follow the similar premise to BS 7671? So when we look in there, is it just going to be lots of new regulations or is there going to be a variety?
There's going to be a variety. There are going to be some new sections. There are going to be some changes. There's going to be some movement.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know, how it can often happen. I still remember with 7671, we had a chapter 47 and then we had a chapter 53 and a 47 and a 46. And anyway, it was a bit like the okie dokie. But so there's definitely a new section and there are some changes and there's some amalgamation and there's some variations.
So again, similar to BS 7671, I take it that if we look in BS 5839 Part 1, we'll have a forward or we'll have some sort of piece of writing at the start which will indicate the changes, making it easier for us to find.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Marcus. So all standards function in the same way. They all give a bit of information at the front end. What they don't do, of course, is give you everything.
Yeah.
And so there will always be changes. And if you're a designer, particularly if you're a designer, you need to be digging into this new standard and working through the particular bits, because some bits might not be where you used to find them, but they may still be there.
Yeah, but they've moved clauses or they've moved to a different section of the standard.
Indeed. But some things will be absolutely brand new, and it really is important that you engage and deal with the changes that exist.
So first of all, what I want to look at, Tim, is what I would often in BS 7671, again being an electrician, think of as a departure. When I'm adding a departure to an installation that I've done, I would do that on my certification. But within 5839 Part 1, it's not actually referred to as a departure, is it?
No, that's right. And it's one of those bits, we know that within the electrical side, we really like to avoid departures, don't we? In fact, I can't think I've ever seen anybody record a departure.
It's a very specific install, and I think that's the important thing behind a departure and a variation. Actually, they're not there to be used to get you out of a hole as such, to make your install easier. They're there for very specific reasons, and they're there because we understand that every premise is different, every premise has different needs, etc.
And up to a point, there is the same principle applies within 5839 Part 1. Variations have always been permitted within 5839 Part 1, and they've been used more regularly than perhaps with 7671, legitimately. But that underlying principle that you stated about they're not to be used flippantly, it remains true. But there are certain departures that are very much frowned upon and to be avoided, even though you could do them. The standard now says you really don't want to and shouldn't do.
Okay, so they're saying, look, even though these sit under a variation, we very much would advise you not to actually vary from these practices. And what would they be? I'm thinking varying from sort of zone plans. Is that mentioned in there?
Zone plans are really important. Zone plans are always required, and you can't vary them away.
No.
Quite simply because if you've not got an addressable system but you're functioning on zone plans, the fire and rescue service just need them. They need to know where to go quickly and safely.
Again, we always say it, don't we? If I work in a building, so here at Scolmore HQ, I work in this building, I'm familiar with the building, I'm familiar with where the escape routes are and all of these things. Actually, a firefighter who's never been in before comes into the building and they're going in blind effectively, aren't they? And they have a time constraint because we've seen from fires, and we was talking, weren't we? You was explaining a fire that happened in Scotland. Actually, the time it takes them is critical to people's lives, isn't it? So,
and of course that always exists, particularly when you've got people that are particularly vulnerable. Perhaps they're elderly, infirm, in care homes and the like, and suddenly you're in a place where it just takes time to get people out of harm's way. And so zone plans are something that can't be varied. The other things that can't really be varied are in a sense, in principle, the same, if you like. If you've got an alarm in a premises where you've got, again, disabled, care homes and the like, you need that alarm to send an automatic signal once it's been sounded to what's called an alarm receiving centre.
Oh, okay.
And the alarm receiving centre does their work. And of course, they're not to be varied away.
Oh, okay. Where actually, again, I've worked in the fire industry before, and that's I would say that's probably varied away quite a lot from the current standard of 5839 Part 1.
So things, for example, a residential care home, you don't vary it away. Supported housing, you don't vary it away. You know, that need to engage a signal with an arm, receiving centre, absolutely.
And it's that time constraint, isn't it? It's getting someone there as quick as possible.
Absolutely the case, yeah.
So we've just looked at Clause 6, Tim, and now we can move on to Clause 7, which actually sits under Section 2, the design considerations. And there's numerous changes here, isn't there, in terms of not necessarily anything new, but what we'll see when we look through it is actually we've got additions into existing clauses. And this is a big part for anyone designing a system and things that you definitely need to take into consideration.
Well, previously, of course, this was Clause 8.
Oh, okay.
It's one of the bits where there's been some rejiggings, but it still says a lot of the same things. I think one of the things which we've touched on in our Section 2 that we looked at is this need for the addressable system in the right place.
Oh, okay.
And in the commentary in this new, this amended element in Clause 7, specifically it touches on the need for addressable systems within places like residential homes, care homes.
And places where there's inevitably a higher risk and a certain time and evacuation plans, etc.
And the need for people to actually physically move people under those circumstances.
So what else do we move on to then in terms of the clauses in 7? Because we said there was a few.
Yeah, there's some that are just tweaks, additions. So for example, we used to have one, it's now Clause 7.5. It would have been 6 dot and then A, B, C, D, E. But it's now numbered. And it's to do with the use of smoke alarms and multi-sensor alarms required within certain places.
Oh, okay.
And one of them detailed was, it used to say in all escape stairways. And now it says in all escape stairways, including.
Oh, okay. So they've elaborated on top of that.
They've grown it. So that specifically also now includes main access and egress stairways. So there's something where it used to be, well, what do you mean by all stairways? We mean that as well.
Yeah. So you sort of answered the question you probably hear all the time. Well, is that included in the escape stairway? And now it's, well, this is included.
Yes,
so,
that's exactly right. Yeah. We've also got other bits. So 7.7, still on stairways. So it says in category L3 systems, it talks again about heat, smoke and gas combustion gas and multi-sensor detectors should be installed in the accommodation side of any door that opens onto escape routes. And that's always been there. That's been there for a long time. But then it says, where stairways are approached through low fire risk lobbies, detectors should be installed on the accommodation side of any door that opens onto the lobby. So effectively, if you're going through a lobby and it's low risk and you're thinking, well, that's okay, I don't need a load of detectors. The minute you go through the door
into one of the properties or the accommodation,
or where there is an increased risk, you put something there.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense though, doesn't it? But again, sometimes it's nice as an installer, especially. It's nice to see this in writing, isn't it? So we're not trying to we're not trying to have a guess at it. We can now see that actually in this situation, we need one there. We need one there.
That's right. And so again, it really is important for designers to engage with this, to just realise, not that there's mission creep, but there's something extra that they need to just weigh up in terms of any design processes. There is obviously, as we move through, Clause 710. 710 is category L1 system. We know an L1 system, don't we? It's pretty all-encompassing.
It is. It's everything, everywhere, isn't it?
But except for odd bathrooms, odd bits and pieces where there's a very low risk of fire. But it also now picks up in 710 where there is specific concerns, where, for example, people are asleep. Then the type of detector is very specific. You're not putting in a heat detector.
I'll say, because that's quite common. We'd maybe put in a heat detector to maybe diswarrant false alarms and things like that for where people are sleeping in that accommodation. But now, is it pointing us towards now maybe using either an optical type of detector or a multi-sensor in them places?
Smoke, combustion gas detectors, that sort of thing. Yes, absolutely, that's the way.
And I suppose that's got something partly to do with speed of response, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, so a heat detector will respond generally slower than an optical or a multi-sensor will in that essence. And again, you've got people sleeping. We've seen it with Grenfell and things like that. We probably have this big concern now within the fire industry of actually we need to increase the time, decrease the time it actually takes to get that system going and then get somebody notified, and then the problem sorted as quick as possible. So yeah.
Absolutely right. And that is about sort of the bits that we touch on in Clause 7.
Yeah. Which is now Section 2.
Which is, well, it's always was in Section 2, but it wasn't
clause. It was Clause 8 rather than
right.
Clause 7. Yeah. So again, if some of this stuff's in there, you're looking for this stuff. Actually, it's not in Clause 8, it's in Clause 7.
Yeah. Absolutely right.
So Tim, when we looked at variation and the clauses within Clause 6, actually we spoke about the need for addressable systems where assistance may be required. Now that actually falls under Clause 7, doesn't it? And specifically Clause 7.12 or 7.12.
Yeah, absolutely. So it says, and I'll just read it out, it says, where occupants of a building are likely to need assistance from staff to evacuate the building, for example, in residential care premises and hospitals, the fire detection and fire alarm system should be addressable if the building has facilities for more than 10 people to sleep. So the minute you hit 10, then you should be putting in an addressable system. That's not to say that you just say, well, if there's only 9, we don't bother.
No.
You know, you weigh up the risk, and it may well be that you just say, look, in these types of premises, I'm going to put an addressable system in.
Because they're likely to add a bedroom or they're likely to do this to make accommodation for someone else. And the word I like within that clause, and again, as an electrician, sometimes we don't see it enough within BS 7671. We often see it as recommend, and we have that conversation. But that word should is a very difficult conversation if somebody says to you, because let's say you didn't install an addressable system, somebody says to you, why didn't you do it? And you say, well, I didn't need to. And they say, well, you should have. So now you have to give a very good engineering reason as to why you decided that you didn't need to. So that word should is a very strong word, isn't it? So we need to really be thinking about it now.
And actually, Marcus, that sort of does tend to point us to what we're going to talk about next, which is a brand new Section 7.
Oh, lovely. New section.
With
we love
a
new
new
sections.
section within 5839 Part 1, which actually does deal with alterations and additions and deals with what do I do when I've got an existing alarm doing this and I then need to add something extra on because of a new build, because of changes, whatever it is.
And if that changes the risk of a building, etc., what do we do in that scenario?
What do we do in that?
Oh,
we'll look at that next. Section 7, which is to do with extension and modifications, and particularly Clause 45, Marcus, extensions.
Oh, okay. So now we're thinking about maybe we've gone to an older property, they've had some work done, and we have to be the responsible persons to install a system within the new part of the building. So is this, Tim, then referring to actually where our liability stands in terms of maybe that older system doesn't comply with this latest edition? Is it similar to BS 7671 in that sort of sense?
Yeah, well, in many ways, yes. Whoever's responsible for the design, the original design, and whoever's responsible for then deciding what additionally is required within an extension, that needs to be clearly delineated, and people need to understand. It's a good word, that, isn't it? Delineated. That'll be word for the day. You can use it anytime you like, and no copyright is held. That being said, work on any extension, and it might be a change of purpose. It could just be an extension of. And so you deal with those things. The new standard applies to the new work.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So very 7671 in that way.
Yeah, not necessarily for the old work. And again, it wouldn't necessarily be fair for somebody who's designing for a new part of the building. Wouldn't necessarily be fair for them to take liability for something that was designed by someone else, would it?
No.
But they still have to consider, surely, Tim, that actually how the purpose of this building, if that isn't suitable, that part of the existing building, surely there's some tough conversations to be had, isn't there? Because we still, again, we try and stay away from being involved with anybody else's work because we don't want it to comply, but we need to make sure that the system is adequate for what it's being used for. And that's the most important thing.
Absolutely right. And of course, the new bit of the system has to coordinate well with the old part of the system. And so there's some very real technical questions that have to be answered. And it might be, for example, if the premises has moved from a general purpose premises to, for example, a care home, then suddenly you have to ask the question about an addressable system.
Because of the clauses we've seen.
Happen. At which point the difficult conversation is going to be, you need a new fire alarm system perhaps because of the need for this sort of thing to take place. So an extension requires much thought. And it's not simply, we just had a few smokes, a few gas, a few heat, a few multi-sensor, a couple of sounders, and the job's a good one. You need to think more clearly and more carefully. Particularly particularly, I think, in the light of the post-Grenfell work, the golden thread runs through here. Somebody has to take responsibility.
100%. And it also mentions certification, doesn't it? And commissioning. So
right.
when we're doing that extended work, we would still be needed to commission it, provide a commissioning report or certification that's needed, etc.
Yeah. And of course, you would then still include an electrical installation certificate for the new work in terms of the thing that's done. So certification, absolutely important.
So we're still in section 17, but actually now we're on clause 46, which deals with modifications. And the first thing I noticed when we look at clause 46 is it gives us some examples. Yeah. And some of them I actually feel, I was like, oh yeah, that seemed a bit basic to me, but actually it makes sense why they're in there. Simply the changing of a head can be a modification. Absolutely. If you've changed the type of it. Yeah. It could be a software update which changes parts of the system. Yeah. It could even be reciting an alarm and moving it over slightly is actually a modification to the system. Absolutely. We have to recognise actually that it's not always a massive amount of work needed to be a modification. So under clause 46, to deal with them sort of modifications and any, it gives us some other clauses, doesn't it, that we have to consider. Yeah. Again, there's a massive push on that responsible persons and the competent persons with BS 5839.
Absolutely. In the end, we know that things like smoke alarms and the rest of it, smoke detectors, are often adjustable depending on time as they move things. So if you're changing something, somebody has to be responsible for saying, yeah, that's the right type, and yes, it's the right thing for the context in which it's going to be placed, and that's fine. And somebody takes responsibility, but remember, you're still then going to need to do the normal inspection, testing,
commissioning, etc.
Certification. All of that's detailed. In essence, what you can't do is just come in like you would do perhaps with a socket cover, take it off, put it on, walk away.
Yeah, like for like change.
Because in a sense, it doesn't much matter with a socket outlet because it's very simple in terms of itself. Yeah. A smoke alarm, a smoke detector is a much more complicated beast, as are many of the other means of detection within fire detection and fire alarm systems. And because it's a fire detection and fire alarm system, and because we need it to work at its point of need.
That's the thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Because we need it to work. If we've got a faulty socket outlet, it's a faulty socket outlet, we change it, it's no big deal. Yeah. If we've got a faulty fire detection and fire alarm system, we have a big deal.
100%. So, and again, why wouldn't you want to test a smoke detector you've put in, your name's on it, because you're going to have to be the one, even if you've been given the job card. Yeah. We know from like the Building Safety Act and that, and talking about response and the golden thread, actually, you've got that job card, your name's on it, you changed that head, you didn't test it, there's a fire in that area, the head doesn't operate, all of a sudden, so...
It's all of that, absolutely. And 100%. So when it comes to a modification, it's not simply a change and walk out the door. You do the inspection, you do the testing, you do the responsibility bit, you make sure that in terms of it functioning as a complete system after you've completed, it's functioning as intended.
Yeah. So we're talking there again about this responsible person's commissioning certification. Yeah. So when we are producing certification or commissioning certificate, do we need to put any non-conformities on there for the existing install?
It's one of those awkward ones, isn't it? But generally the standard's quite clear. There is a clause here that says no.
Yeah. So we're not required to. No?
So you're not required to. But what you've got to do, of course, is still be aware of knock-on consequences.
Of course.
And it's that bit that you just need to be aware of. But no, you do not need to comment or say on the existing system does not any longer conform to the new
on any part I haven't worked on effectively. Yeah. But as always, and we say it as electricians all the time, actually, is it a bad idea to say to the customer, there are some non-conformities, and actually put the ball in their court and say, well, it's up to you now. I've told you that there are these I don't have to tell you, but I've let you know. So, but there isn't a requirement to record that on a certificate as such.
And with a fire detection fire alarm system, the user is very much engaged in the overall process. And if they're not, there's a problem because the standard does state that the user should take some responsibility for some of this.
And they should, again, it talks about the user should be past documents. So the fire logbook, the zone plan, again, it re-mentions the zone plan. If we did, kind of common sense, if we've recited detectors or we've changed an area within that system and maybe we've added on a zone or there's a different zone, it's very important we update that zone plan.
And it's very important that any as-fitted drawings are updated.
Oh, of course,
so that whoever then comes along goes, oh, there's been a change. All right, I can see where that is. That's fine.
Yeah, because again, it might not always be the maintenance company who deal with the maintenance of the system that actually does the installation work. It could be a third-party contractor who does the the installation, and somebody else just comes in and services it and keeps it on that yearly or whatever time it's needed.
And of course, the other thing, Marcus, is where you've got a system or a premises that's been shut down for a period of time.
Yeah.
You know, the fire alarm system hasn't been functioning because nobody's been there, everything's been shut down, you power it up, you do the business. Can you be sure that the fire detection and fire alarm system is functioning?
Without a commission or without a service of some sort,
now,
you would need, Does it mention that within the clauses?
It does. So the very last clause within 46 simply says, if the system has been disconnected for a long period of time and is being brought back into operation, the recommendations for inspection and test of the system over a 12-month period should be undertaken. So you jump back in with a 12-month inspection and test, record it, put the data together, just to make sure you know it's working at the point of need. Yeah,
and it's working, and if it's suitable for what you're using it for now, because if a premises is closed down, let's say a shop in some sort of set of shops, and actually somebody else leases that building and use it for something different, that may change the requirements. So.
And of course, the other bits that you would really have to be very careful of is those bits that are not part of 5839 Part 1, but are part of the cause and effect elements. So, for example, if you've got magnetic retainer doors, then although there's bits and pieces that talk about that within the standard, it refers out to a different standard. And so it's making sure that the cause and effect bits still function as intended after this period of time as well.
So, Tim, what if we have a fire? Does Section 7 under Clause 46, does that talk about any sort of instances where we've had a fire, what we need to think about doing?
There are always consequences to fire, aren't there? I mean, obviously, if the fire's significant, then I've been on fires where you just strip everything out. It's been so damaging, so devastating.
It's almost start again.
It's start again. It's a rewire, it's a rechange, it's a renew. If there's been a fire, though, that simply caused the fire detection and fire alarm system to engage and do its job, and it's done its job, then you need to say, well, it's done its job. We have had a fire. We would still need to then check that it's still now ready to function a second time, should that be needed. Because if you've had a fire, you're not going to shut down the whole of the building because of a fire in a small location. You're just wanting a situation where the fire detection and fire alarm system actually continues functioning. So you do the checks. You check your manual call points, you check your smokes, you check your heats, you check that
visual check of the wiring that's accessible. That's
within that location of the fire. You know, you don't need to check where there hasn't been a fire. You check your places where it has been a fire, and then you do the reassessment.
And then and at that point we say, unfortunately, the detectors have become damaged where they're no longer usable. We need to think about replacing this part, replacing that part, etc. So often I'll refer back to like being an electrician. So where people, I've had it in the past, where people have had their immersion heater explode and it's caused water damage to lots of parts of the electrical system. Actually, I'm required to go in and do an EICR and just confirm what the extent of the damage is. And that's all we're doing, isn't it? We're just confirming what the extent of the damage is, what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done, and whether it's safe to put back into service. So.
Particularly if it's been covered by water. So if you're going to pour water in electronic components, you're going to change them.
Yeah, of course.
You know. But if all they've done is actually sound, and somebody's knocked a brake glass out of it, then you'd replace the brake glass if there's no other damage. It's,
that's what it is.
Sort of idea.
But it still needs to be checked.
It
doesn't
needs
it?
to be checked. That's right.
So there we have it, BS 5839 Part 1, some of the new changes that me and Tim have discussed. Remembering there still are other changes that we haven't discussed, so keep an eye out for them when you read the document itself. So we hope you've enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we'll see you on the next one.